What's up, guys? Stacy here from Becoming Financially Fit, and today we have an interesting topic to talk about. We're going to be talking about how much is $1 billion. A lot of people may think they know how much $1 billion is or how much money a billionaire actually have, but today we're going to be putting that number into perspective, and I'm going to be showing you guys a couple examples about how much $1 billion actually is. But if this is the first time you guys are seeing my content or the first time you're on my channel, I make videos about personal finance, financial literacy, savings, investing, and I also try to throw some entrepreneurship in there as well. So if you're interested in any of those topics or you want to see more videos like this in the future, make sure you subscribe to the channel and don't forget to hit the bell to be updated anytime I post new content. All right, let's get into it. So now let's get into the first example, thinking about the actual amount of money $1 billion actually is. When you think about it and you think of billionaires, you just think they have unlimited amounts of money, and it's technically true. But I want you guys to actually see how much $1 billion is. So let's take our first example. Imagine if you had one bill and on that bill was $1 million. How many bills would you need in order to have $1 billion? Well, you would need 1,000 $1 million bills. It's kind of hard to imagine having $1 million bill and thinking about it in terms of just spending it normally, but it actually equates to 1,000 million. That's how much $1 billion is. So when you hit your first million, that might be cool and all, but you're not really going to be making it in that billionaire status unless you have 1,000 $1 million bills. Now, I also want to give you an example about how much money $1 billion can make you over the course of a lifetime. So essentially a 30-year bond period. So in early April, I checked out some bond prices. If you guys don't know what a bond is, it's essentially a loan that you're either giving to a corporation or a government. And so for this example, let's use the safest bond in the world. And that's a 30-year US bond. And as of early April, the interest that the bond was paying was 2.35%. which essentially means that the government will pay you 2.35% on each bond that you have. Each bond is $1,000. So let's say you have $1 billion worth of US government bonds, 30-year bonds, and they're going to be paying you 2.35% per year for 30 years. And then at the end of that 30-year period, they're going to give you the entire $1 billion back. And that includes the original principal plus everything that they've paid you over the course of 30 years. So just thinking about that in a little bit more detail, the government's going to be paying you $23.5 million every year for 30 years. Then at the end of that 30-year period, they're going to be giving you your $1 billion back. So if you add up 23.5 million, multiply that by 30 years, that means the government's going to be paying you $705 million in interest. Plus, they're going to be giving you your $1 billion back at the end of that 30-year period. So all in all, you're going to have $1.7 billion at the end of 30 years. So now let's go into a real life example and put this number to the test. Earlier in the year, I looked up something about Jeff Bezos. Jeff Bezos, his net worth is about $185 billion. It's not all cash. It's not all stock in Amazon. It's everything he owns. But let's say he just had $185 billion sitting around and he wanted to invest it in US Treasury bonds. So what he would do is he would loan the government $185 billion. And let's do some calculations and see how much money they would be paying him per year and then how much money he would have at the end of that 30-year bond period. So if Jeff Bezos were to do this and give the government pretty much $185 billion in order to receive bonds from the US government, how much would he be getting paid per year? Well, he would be getting paid about $4.3 billion each year. And that's literally the safest investment he can do. So $4.3 billion each year over the course of 30 years. And then at the 30-year period, he would get his $185 billion back. So that means over the course of 30 years, the government would end up paying Jeff Bezos $130 billion, plus they would pay him back the $185 that he loaned them 30 years prior. So now let's take this example from Jeff Bezos to the average American. Let's say the average American has $1,000 and that $1,000 equates to $1 billion, right? How much would typical prices be for normal things that we use? So the average home price in California is a little pricey. It's about $580,000. And if you divide $580,000 by $1 billion, that equates to 0.00058%. Doesn't seem like much to $1 billion, but now let's take it back to that $1,000 example. So if I was a billionaire, that would literally be the equivalent of me spending 58 cents out of that $1,000 that I have, which is pretty crazy to think about. A $580,000 house to a billionaire is the equivalent to 58 cents for someone who has $1,000. Now let's go on to the next example. Tuition at Harvard per year is about $50,000. So let's do that same example. $50,000 divided by $1 billion, it's less than 0.5%. So now thinking about that in terms of having $1,000, that would be the equivalent of me spending 5 cents out of that $1,000 on college tuition at a place like Harvard. Going on to the next example, the average car in the United States is about $40,000. And same thing, divide that 40,000 by a billion, and that will be the equivalent of if someone had $1,000, them spending 4 cents, 4 pennies on the average car here in the US. So now let's up the stakes a little bit. Let's move on to the Lambo truck. The base model for the Lambo truck is about $580,000. So what would that be in terms to a billionaire? So let's go through the same example. 225,000 divided by $1 billion. That would be the equivalent of me spending about 25 cents out of that $1,000 on the Lambo truck. But now let's take it to the next level. A private jet, normal private jet, costs on average about $25 million. So let's take that $25 million and divide it by our $1 billion. If I had $1,000, that would be the equivalent of me spending only $25 out of that $1,000 in this example. So now you guys can start to see how much money billionaires actually have and how far it actually goes for them in terms of spending power. So now let's add all of these expenses up and see if it really took a hit to that $1,000 stack that I had. If I add all those expenses up, it equates to about $25.9 out of my $1,000 that I had to spend. And that's in terms of me being a billionaire. But let's not forget about the fact that I had a 30-year treasury bond and I was bringing in 23.5 cents each year. That means that over the course of each year, I would be spending about $2.4 out of my $1,000. And that's if I had a private jet, a Lambo truck, an average car, a home in California, and I was also paying tuition each year at Harvard. So in short, can a billionaire ever go broke? And the answer is yes, but they would essentially have to wake up every day and dedicate their every living and waking second to spending money. And how long would it take them? It would take them about 400 years to spend all their money if they were only invested in the safest investment on the face of the earth, a 30-year US Treasury. And that means that over the course of 400 years, on that 400th year, they would essentially be out of cash. But over the course of those 400 years, they would be buying assets the entire time. They would be buying homes, private jets, real estate, exotic cars. So even though they spent every second of the past 400 years spending money, they've been spending it on assets. So that $1 billion that they initially had is probably going to be worth $1 trillion after 400 years. So you can start to see why it's literally impossible for someone that has this and just invests in the most simple, safe, and effective investment, a 30-year US Treasury, can never lose money. And it just goes to show how far $1 billion actually gets you. And this goes into my main point, generational wealth, how it can work for you or against you. If you were fortunate enough to be born into wealth or have the ability to create wealth throughout your lifetime, then you're going to be better off than 99% of the individuals on the planet. But let's think about the facts. A lot of Americans don't even have $1,000 to cover an unexpected expense. Not to mention the fact that most are drowning in either student debt, credit cards, auto loans, or mortgages that they might not pay off for another 30 years. You can see how the effects of not being able to generate wealth or be born into a wealthy family can affect your generations to come for generations after generations after generations. So I want you guys to try something out. Add up your entire net worth, divide that number by $1 billion, and then multiply it by 1,000. And even if you are a millionaire, for every dollar you have, a billionaire has 1,000 times more than you. The wealth gap is a real thing here in the US, and it's a real thing globally. So I would definitely urge you, take your time and find ways to build wealth and build assets for generations to come. Believe me, even if you can only start out with, let's say, $50,000 or $100,000 to pass on to the next generation, you can see that over time, just investing and reinvesting those funds and building assets and buying other assets will propel you over the course of one generation to the next generation. This is not an easy thing, and it really does take a lot of time. But if you really, really make it your life's goal or your life's mission to build for your next generation and to actually build generational wealth, then use this video as your tour guide. $1 billion is essentially an unlimited amount of money, but in order to get there, you have to take the first step. So what do you guys think? Do you guys think $1 billion is too much, just right, or not enough? If you were in the situation of being a billionaire, would you want to get taxed at, let's say, 50 to 70%? Or do you think that billionaires generate wealth for the masses? I would love to hear what you guys have to say. Drop a comment below. And if you got some value from this video, make sure you give it a like. Before we get out of here, if you're not subscribed to the channel yet, make sure you subscribe to the channel to stay updated on videos like this and videos I'll do in the future. But I'll see you guys on the next one.